Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the stories. Story 1. The Bleeding Walls. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a prank. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I had just moved into the old Victorian house that had stood vacant for years. The realtor had mentioned its history briefly, glossing over the details with a nervous chuckle. I didn't care. The house was beautiful, a dream come true. But that night, as I was unpacking in the living room, I saw it. Scrawled across the wall in what appeared to be blood were the words, "Get out." My heart pounded as I approached the wall, the metallic scent of blood becoming more pronounced. I touched the letters, expecting the paint to be fresh, but it was dry. Panicking, I checked the house, room by room, but found no signs of intruders. I convinced myself it was some cruel joke left by the previous owner, but a seed of unease had been planted. The next day, I bought a can of paint to cover the message. The rich cream color blended perfectly with the old plaster walls, and for a moment, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I went about my day, settling into my new home, feeling a bit lighter. As evening approached, I decided to reward myself with a glass of wine. Sitting in the living room, the memories of the previous night felt like a distant nightmare. But then I noticed it. The message was back, bleeding through the fresh paint as if it had never been covered. This time, the letters seemed angrier, more pronounced. "Get out" stared back at me, taunting. My pulse quickened, and I stumbled back, dropping my wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the red liquid seeping into the cracks, mirroring the sinister message on the wall. I decided to call a friend, someone who might provide a rational explanation or at least some comfort. Emma, my best friend since college, picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her voice a soothing balm to my frazzled nerves. "Emma, you have to come over. I think something's wrong with my house," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. She was at my door within the hour, her concerned eyes scanning my face. "Show me," she demanded. I led her to the living room, pointing at the message. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Okay, that's weird. Maybe it's some kind of chemical reaction with the old paint," she suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. That night, Emma stayed with me. We watched movies, trying to distract ourselves, but the unease lingered. We both slept in the living room, too afraid to venture into the darkened halls of the house. Sometime in the early hours, I awoke to a cold breeze. The windows were shut and the heater was on, but the air was frigid. Then I saw it. Another message, fresh and wet, dripping onto the floor. "You were warned." I shook Emma awake, my voice trembling. "Emma, look." She sat up, her eyes widening in horror. There was no denying it now. Something was very, very wrong. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The following morning, Emma insisted we call a professional. She found a local contractor known for dealing with old houses and their quirks. By midday, Tom arrived, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude. He examined the walls, the messages, and the house's history. After a thorough inspection, he scratched his head, baffled. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted. "But I'll repaint it with a sealant. That should do the trick." We watched as Tom meticulously applied layer after layer of specialized paint, sealing off any potential bleed-through. The walls looked pristine by the time he finished, and for the first time since moving in, I felt a glimmer of hope. Emma stayed with me again, just in case. The night was uneventful, and the next morning, the walls remained clean. Emma had to leave for work, but she promised to check in later. I decided to explore the house more thoroughly, hoping to uncover some clue about the mysterious messages. The attic seemed like a good place to start. Climbing the creaky steps, I felt a chill in the air. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, untouched for years. I rummaged through old trunks and boxes, finding nothing but moth-eaten clothes and forgotten knickknacks. Just as I was about to give up, a small, leather-bound journal caught my eye. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with elegant handwriting. The entries detailed the life of a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house a century ago. Margaret wrote of her loneliness, her despair, and finally, her descent into madness. She believed the house was haunted, that the walls whispered to her in the night. Her final entries grew increasingly frantic, talking about messages in blood and warnings from unseen forces. My hands trembled as I read her last, chilling words. The walls are alive. They feed on fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. Margaret's journal haunted my thoughts, her terror seeping into my own reality. As the house settled, every creak and groan felt like a sinister whisper. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted again. I wrapped myself in a blanket, heart racing. The house was silent, too silent. Then, I heard it, a faint, scratching sound coming from the walls. I followed the noise to the living room, dread pooling in my stomach. The wall where the first message had appeared was bulging, as if something was trying to break through. My breath hitched, and I backed away, my mind racing. Was it an animal? Or something far worse? The bulge grew, and with a final, sickening rip, the plaster gave way. A torrent of blood poured out, pooling at my feet. Paralyzed with fear, I stared at the growing puddle, the metallic scent overwhelming. From within the crimson flood, words began to form, as if guided by an invisible hand. They are here. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to comprehend the horror unfolding before me. The room seemed to close in, the walls whispering maliciously. In my panic, I called Emma again. "Emma, please come over." "It's happening again," I pleaded, my voice shaking. She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she was at my door, eyes wide with fear and concern. "What happened?" she asked, taking in the scene. I pointed to the wall, the blood slowly seeping away but the words remaining. "They're here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Emma grabbed my hand, her grip tight. "We need to find out who or what they are," she said firmly. "And why they're haunting you." Emma and I spent the next morning scouring the internet for information on the house and any paranormal occurrences in the area. Our search yielded countless ghost stories and urban legends, but nothing concrete. Desperate, we decided to contact a local medium renowned for her ability to communicate with spirits. Her name was Madame Serafina, and she had a reputation for uncovering the darkest secrets. Madame Serafina agreed to come over that evening. As dusk settled, her presence filled the room with a palpable sense of unease. She was an older woman, her eyes sharp and knowing. "This house has a dark history," she began, her voice a low, melodic whisper. "I can feel the energy of those who suffered here." She walked through the rooms, her fingers brushing the walls as if feeling for a pulse. When she reached the living room, she paused, closing her eyes. "There is something malevolent here," she said, her voice tense. "The walls have absorbed the pain and suffering of those who lived here before. They are trying to warn you, to drive you away." Madame Serafina began her ritual, lighting candles and burning sage to cleanse the space. She chanted in a language I didn't recognize, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. As the smoke filled the room, the atmosphere grew heavier, the temperature dropping once more. Suddenly, the walls began to throb, as if alive. "They are here," she whispered, her eyes snapping open. "The spirits of those trapped within these walls." She motioned for me to come closer. "You must ask them what they want. Only then can you hope to be free." My heart pounded as I approached the wall, the blood-stained message glaring back at me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. The house seemed to hold its breath, the silence oppressive. Then, faintly at first, I heard a whisper. It grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the room. "Justice," it hissed. "Revenge." The words seemed to echo from every corner, wrapping around me like a vice. "They want vengeance," Madame Serafina said, her face pale. "Someone wronged them, and they cannot rest until their tormentor is punished." Emma looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Who do they want revenge on?" she asked. Madame Serafina shook her head. "That is for you to discover." The spirits are bound to this house, and so are you, until their demands are met. That night, sleep was impossible. The house felt like a living entity, its walls pulsing with malevolent energy. I sat up in bed, the journal open on my lap, searching for any clue that might reveal the spirit's tormentor. Margaret's entries were increasingly erratic, filled with paranoia and fear. She mentioned a man, someone she had trusted, who had betrayed her. As the hours ticked by, I felt the house closing in on me, its whispers growing louder. I needed to know more about Margaret and her tragic end. Determined, I decided to visit the local library the next day, hoping to find records that might shed light on her story. I called Emma and told her of my plan. "Be careful," she warned. "The spirits are restless. They won't make this easy for you." The library was a haven of quiet and order, a stark contrast to the chaos in my home. I combed through old newspapers and town records, piecing together Margaret's life. She had been married to a man named Charles, a prominent figure in the town. But as I delved deeper, I found darker truths. Charles had been accused of horrific crimes that had driven Margaret to madness. As I copied the information, I felt a cold draft, and the whispering began again, even here. Justice, it demanded. I knew then that I had to confront the past to appease the spirits. Margaret and the others wanted retribution, and I was their unwilling messenger. Returning home from the library, I felt a heavy weight of dread settle over me. The information I had uncovered about Charles painted him as a monster, a man who had abused his power and inflicted untold suffering on those around him. The more I read, the more I understood the depth of Margaret's despair and the house's dark energy. That evening, I shared my findings with Emma. "Charles was a monster," I said, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "He tortured and killed people. Margaret must have known, and it drove her insane." Emma nodded, her expression grim. "So, the spirits want justice for what Charles did. But he's long dead. How can we give them what they want?" Madame Serafina had warned that the spirits would not rest until their tormentor was punished. But how could we bring justice to someone who had been dead for over a century? The answer eluded us, and the house's oppressive atmosphere grew thicker with each passing hour. Late that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whispers again. Justice. Revenge. They echoed through the house, relentless and accusing. I got up, following the voices to the living room. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie light, the words "he must pay" etched in blood. Frustrated and desperate, I shouted into the darkness, "How? How can I make him pay?" The house groaned, the walls shuddering as if in response. Suddenly, a new message appeared, the letters forming slowly, almost painfully. "Find his descendant." My blood ran cold. The spirits wanted retribution, not just on Charles, but on his bloodline. I called Emma, her phone ringing endlessly before she picked up, groggy and confused. "Emma, they want his descendant," I said, my voice urgent. "What? Are you serious?" she asked, disbelief evident in her tone. "Yes. We need to find someone related to Charles. They won't stop until we do." The next day, Emma and I returned to the library, diving into genealogical records and town archives. It was a tedious process, tracing the lineage of a man who had lived over a century ago. But finally, we found a lead. Charles had a brother whose descendants still lived in the area. We tracked down the family to a nearby town. They owned a small farm, isolated and seemingly unremarkable. Emma and I drove there, the tension between us palpable. As we approached the farmhouse, I felt the whispers intensify, urging me forward. A middle-aged man answered the door, his face lined with years of hard work and weathered by the sun. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone wary. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "My name is Julia. This is Emma. We need to talk to you about your ancestor, Charles." His expression darkened. "What about him?" "There's something you need to know," Emma said gently. "Please, can we come in?" Reluctantly, he stepped aside, allowing us into his modest home. We explained everything: the house, the messages, the spirit's demands. His skepticism was evident, but as we shared the gruesome details of Charles's crimes, his demeanor shifted from disbelief to horror. "I knew he was a bad man," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't know it was this bad." "The spirits want justice," I said. "They want revenge on Charles's bloodline. I think you need to come back to the house with us." Fear flickered in his eyes, but he nodded. "If it will put them to rest, I'll do it." We returned to the house as night fell, the air thick with anticipation. The walls were silent, waiting. As the man stepped inside, the whispers began anew, louder and more insistent. Justice. Revenge. He stood in the living room, facing the wall where the messages had appeared. "I'm here," he said, his voice shaking. "Do what you must." The house seemed to exhale, the tension lifting slightly. The wall trembled, and a new message appeared: the bloodline must end. My heart stopped. The spirits demanded more than his presence. They wanted his life. The room was deathly silent as the gravity of the message sank in. Emma and I exchanged horrified glances, and the man, James, we had learned, stood frozen, staring at the blood-red words on the wall. The bloodline must end. The spirits weren't seeking mere retribution, they demanded a life for a life, a final sacrifice to balance the scales of justice. James's face went pale, and he stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, there must be another way," he whispered, voice breaking. Emma reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "James, we can't ask you to do this," she said softly. "There has to be another solution." But deep down, I knew the spirits wouldn't rest until their demands were met. The house seemed to press in around us, the air thick with expectation. I stepped forward, trying to muster the courage to speak. "James, maybe there's a way to break the curse without you giving up your life. Perhaps we can find a way to appease the spirits." Madame Serafina's words echoed in my mind. "You must ask them what they want." I approached the wall, my heart pounding. "What can we do to end this?" I called out, my voice trembling. The house seemed to shudder in response. The walls began to bleed again, the crimson letters forming slowly, as if the spirits were straining to communicate. "A life for a life," the wall spelled out. "Only then will we rest." Tears welled in my eyes. This was their final demand, their unyielding requirement. I turned to James, guilt and sorrow churning within me. "James, maybe there's a way to fake it. To trick the spirits into thinking the bloodline has ended," I suggested desperately, grasping at straws. James shook his head, defeated. "They know. They always know," he said, voice hollow. "I can feel it. There's no escaping this." Suddenly, a chilling idea crossed my mind. What if the sacrifice didn't have to be permanent? What if there was a way to satisfy the spirits without taking an actual life? What if we simulate a death? Convince the spirits that the bloodline has ended, but save James? I proposed, looking to Emma and James for validation. Emma's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. How? How could we possibly do that? "An elaborate ruse," I said, the idea taking shape. "A fake death, a staged funeral. If the spirits are satisfied with the ritual, maybe they'll leave." James looked uncertain but willing to try anything to avoid the ultimate price. "What do we need to do?" The plan was set into motion. We contacted Madame Serafina, explaining our desperate situation. She agreed to help, providing us with the necessary tools and guidance to carry out the deception. We staged the scene in the living room, using candles, incense, and a lifelike mannequin to represent James. Madame Serafina chanted ancient incantations, invoking the spirits and guiding them towards peace. As the ritual progressed, the house seemed to vibrate with energy, the walls thrumming with a supernatural force. I held my breath, praying our plan would work. The blood-red messages began to fade, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. But then, the temperature dropped sharply, and the walls started bleeding anew. Not enough, the message screamed. A life must be taken. Desperation clawed at us. The spirits were not fooled. They demanded true blood, true sacrifice. James's face twisted in anguish as he realized the inevitable. "It's me they want," he said quietly, resolve hardening in his eyes. "If this is what it takes to end the torment, so be it." "No, James," Emma cried, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another way." But James stepped forward, determination in his every move. "Tell my family, tell them I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. He stood before the wall, his fate sealed. The house seemed to pulse with approval, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. In a final, heart-wrenching moment, James collapsed to the floor, his life ebbing away. The walls absorbed the sacrifice, the blood seeping into the plaster, the house exhaling a deep, satisfied breath. The whispers ceased, the oppressive energy lifting, leaving us in a stunned silence. Emma and I stood there, numb with shock and grief. The house was still, the spirits appeased. But the price of peace was too high. The days following James's sacrifice were a blur. Emma and I struggled to come to terms with what had happened, the horror of it all weighing heavily on our hearts. The house, now silent, felt like a tomb. The walls no longer bled, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, but the cost had been devastating. Emma stayed with me for a few days, helping to clean up and offering much-needed support. But eventually, she had to return to her own life. Alone in the house, I felt the crushing weight of solitude and guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss, that the spirits had not truly been appeased. One evening, as I was sorting through James's belongings to return to his family, I found an old photograph tucked inside a book. It was a picture of James with his family, but there was something off about it. In the background, the house loomed ominously, and in the window, a shadowy figure seemed to stare out, watching us. My heart raced as I examined the photo closer. The figure was faint, but unmistakably there. I felt a chill run down my spine. Had the spirits known all along? Was there something more they wanted from us? I decided to investigate further, determined to uncover the truth. I called Emma, explaining what I had found. "I think there's more to this than we realized," I said. "There might be another spirit, someone who wasn't satisfied with James's sacrifice." Emma agreed to come over that evening, her voice tinged with worry. "Be careful, Julia. We don't know what we're dealing with." As night fell, we combed through the house again, searching for any clues we might have missed. The attic seemed the most likely place to start. We climbed the creaky steps, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was as we had left it, dusty and filled with forgotten relics. We searched through the boxes and trunks, hoping to find something that would explain the figure in the photograph. Finally, we came across an old, locked chest hidden behind a stack of crates. With some effort, we managed to pry it open. Inside, we found a collection of letters, brittle with age, written by Margaret. The letters revealed a shocking truth: Charles had not acted alone. There had been a partner, someone who had helped him commit his atrocities. The letters spoke of a pact, a promise of power and protection in exchange for their heinous deeds. The partner's name was Jonathan, and he had disappeared shortly after Margaret's death. "Jonathan," Emma whispered, her face pale. "He's the one in the photograph. He's still here, still part of this house." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The spirits hadn't been satisfied because the true orchestrator of their suffering had never been punished. Jonathan's spirit remained, bound to the house, feeding off the torment of those who lived here. Determined to end this once and for all, Emma and I prepared another ritual, this time to confront and banish Jonathan's spirit. We gathered the necessary items and made our way to the living room, the heart of the house's darkness. The air grew thick with tension as we set up the candles and incense, the flames flickering ominously. As we began the ritual, chanting the incantations Madame Serafina had taught us, the temperature plummeted. The house groaned, and the walls seemed to close in around us. A dark, shadowy figure materialized in the center of the room, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. "Jonathan," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "Your reign of terror ends tonight." The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the house. "You think you can banish me? I am part of this house, part of its very foundation." Emma stepped forward, her voice filled with determination. "You will never find peace until you face judgment for your crimes. Leave this place, and let the spirits of your victims rest." The figure snarled, lunging towards us. The candles flickered wildly, and the room grew darker. But we held our ground, continuing the incantation with renewed fervor. The air crackled with energy, the oppressive force of Jonathan's spirit battling against our will. Finally, with a piercing scream, the figure dissipated, the darkness lifting from the room. The house seemed to sigh, the tension draining away as the last of Jonathan's presence faded. The walls, once again, were silent. Emma and I collapsed, exhausted but triumphant. The house felt different now, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The spirits, at long last, were at peace. Days passed, and the house remained eerily quiet. The oppressive energy had lifted, and for the first time since I moved in, the air felt breathable. Emma and I decided to take a break from the house, spending a weekend at her place to clear our minds and recover from the harrowing ordeal. Returning to the house on Monday, I felt a cautious optimism. The walls, once soaked with blood and anguish, now seemed merely old and worn. I went about my day, cautiously hopeful that the nightmare was behind me. Emma checked in frequently, both of us wary of any lingering threats. One evening, I decided to revisit the attic, curious to see if there was anything else we had missed. As I sifted through the remnants of lives long past, I came across an old, ornate mirror. Its surface was dusty and cracked, but something about it drew me in. I wiped it clean, revealing a reflection that seemed deeper than the glass. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. I backed away, heart pounding, as words began to form on the mirror's surface. "Beware," it spelled out, the letters stark against the fogged glass. Panic surged through me. Had we missed something? Was there another spirit still haunting the house? I called Emma, my voice shaking. "Emma, it's happening again. There's a message on the mirror in the attic." She arrived within the hour, her face pale with concern. We stared at the mirror together, the warning glaring back at us. "Beware," it repeated, as if trying to communicate something urgent. We decided to call Madame Serafina again, hoping she could shed light on this new development. Madame Serafina listened intently as we described the mirror and the message. "Mirrors are gateways," she said, her voice grave. "They can trap spirits, reflect other dimensions. It's possible you've uncovered a portal, a connection to the spirit world." The thought sent chills down my spine. "What do we do? How do we close it?" "You must confront whatever lies beyond," she instructed. "Only by facing it can you hope to seal the gateway." Armed with candles, sage, and the mirror, we set up a ritual in the attic. Madame Serafina guided us through the process, her chants filling the air with a sense of purpose and dread. As we focused on the mirror, the temperature plummeted, and the attic seemed to warp and twist around us. The surface of the mirror shimmered, and a dark shape began to emerge. It was Jonathan, or what was left of him, a twisted, grotesque form, his eyes burning with malevolent fire. "You thought you could rid yourselves of me," he hissed, his voice echoing through the attic. "But I am eternal. I am part of this house, this land." Emma and I held our ground, repeating the incantations Madame Serafina had taught us. The air crackled with energy, the mirror vibrating with a force that threatened to shatter it. Jonathan's form twisted and writhed, his screams filling the air as we fought to banish him once and for all. With a final, desperate cry, Jonathan's form shattered, the mirror splintering into 1,000 pieces. The energy dissipated, leaving us breathless and trembling. The air grew warm again, the oppressive weight lifting as the last of Jonathan's presence faded. Madame Serafina placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and caution. "The gateway is closed, but the house still holds power. Be vigilant. The spirits have been appeased, but the land remembers." Emma and I nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. The house, though quieter, was still a place of dark history and lingering echoes. We had faced its horrors and survived, but we knew we could never truly escape its past. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whisper, almost a sigh. "Thank you," it said, the words soft and sincere. The spirits, at last, were at peace. But as I drifted into a restless sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house still had secrets to uncover and that our ordeal was far from over. Despite the newfound peace, an uneasy feeling lingered in the house. Emma and I couldn't shake the sense that something remained unresolved. Every night, I slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of shadowy figures and distant whispers. One night, the whispers grew louder, pulling me from my slumber. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw a faint glow emanating from the attic. Reluctantly, I climbed the stairs, Emma close behind. The attic was cold, the air thick with anticipation. The shattered pieces of the mirror lay where we had left them, but now, a ghostly light surrounded them. As we approached, the light intensified, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the fragments of the mirror began to move, assembling themselves into a new pattern. Before our eyes, the shards formed a mosaic, depicting scenes of the house's past. We watched, mesmerized, as the images revealed the full extent of Charles and Jonathan's crimes. The final scene showed Margaret, her face twisted in despair, holding something in her hands, an old, leather-bound book. Emma gasped. "The journal. There's more to it than we realized." We retrieved the journal from the attic, carefully examining the pages we had overlooked. Hidden in the back cover was a folded letter, its edges brittle with age. As I unfolded it, my hands trembled. The letter was written in Margaret's elegant script, detailing a hidden room in the house where Charles and Jonathan had conducted their darkest rituals. "Find the room," the letter urged. "Uncover the truth, and you will set us free." Determined, Emma and I searched the house, tapping on walls and floorboards, listening for hollow sounds. Finally, in the basement, we found it, a hidden door, concealed behind a bookshelf. With a deep breath, we pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder as we descended, the oppressive feeling returning. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and in the center of the room stood an altar, stained with blood. The horror of the place was palpable, the air thick with the malevolent energy of countless dark rituals. "We need to cleanse this place," Emma said, her voice resolute. "It's the source of the house's power." We set to work, using the tools and incantations Madame Serafina had provided. As we chanted, the room seemed to come alive, the symbols glowing with an eerie light. The ground shook, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the shadows. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and twisted. It was a manifestation of the house's darkest energies, a culmination of the evil that had taken place within its walls. "You cannot destroy me," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of tormented souls. "I am eternal." We continued the incantation, our voices growing louder, more insistent. The figure writhed, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Begone!" Emma shouted, her voice filled with authority. "You have no power here." With a final, piercing scream, the figure disintegrated, the room flooding with light. The oppressive energy dissipated, replaced by a sense of profound peace. The symbols on the walls faded, and the air grew warm. We had done it. We had cleansed the house. Exhausted but relieved, we climbed back up the stairs, leaving the hidden chamber behind. As we emerged into the light of day, the house seemed transformed, its oppressive weight lifted. The walls were silent, the air fresh and clean. We stood in the living room, absorbing the quiet. The spirits, at long last, were free. The house, once a place of darkness and despair, now felt like a true home. As Emma prepared to leave, she turned to me, a smile on her face. "We did it, Julia. We finally did it." I nodded, feeling a sense of closure and relief. "Thank you, Emma. I couldn't have done this without you." As she drove away, I stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. The house was quiet, at peace. But as I turned to go inside, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a faint, ghostly figure watching from the window, a sad smile on its face. Margaret. Her spirit, at last, was free. The house was still and silent, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace. But as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that some stories never truly end, and that the echoes of the past would always remain. End of story 1. Subscribe for more scary stories. Story 2. The Mirror World. When I first noticed my reflection was missing from the mirror, I was sure it was a trick of the light. The early morning fog hung low in the air, casting strange shadows across the bathroom. I rubbed my eyes, blinked hard, and leaned closer to the mirror. The reflection didn't return. Instead, a swirling vortex of darkness began to form where my image should have been. It was as if the mirror itself was becoming a black hole, sucking in all the light around it. "Anna, are you all right in there?" called out my roommate, Jenna, from the kitchen. Her voice, usually so steady, sounded distant and distorted, like it was coming from underwater. "Yeah, just something weird with the mirror," I replied, my voice trembling. I could barely tear my gaze away from the abyss forming in front of me. The vortex seemed to pulse, almost alive, as if it was watching me just as intently as I was watching it. Jenna's footsteps approached, and she appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean, weird?" "Look," I said, stepping aside to give her a clear view. But as soon as she came into sight, the vortex vanished, replaced by my normal reflection. I looked perfectly ordinary, albeit a bit pale and wide-eyed. Jenna frowned. "I don't see anything strange. Maybe you're just tired. We did stay up pretty late last night." I wanted to argue, to insist that something was horribly wrong, but Jenna's rationality made me doubt my own senses. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just exhausted. "Yeah, you're probably right," I conceded, forcing a smile. Throughout the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every reflective surface seemed to hold a hint of that swirling darkness, and I avoided mirrors as much as possible. By nightfall, my nerves were frayed. Jenna tried to cheer me up with a movie, but I could barely focus. My mind kept drifting back to the morning's eerie encounter. As I prepared for bed, I hesitated outside the bathroom door. The thought of facing the mirror again filled me with dread, but I had to know if it was still there. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped inside. The mirror hung innocently on the wall, reflecting only the dim light of the single bulb overhead. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to look. My reflection stared back at me, looking just as tired and worn as I felt. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned to leave, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. The vortex had returned, and this time, it was bigger, more intense. I reached out, as if to touch it, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. The instant my fingers brushed the surface of the glass, a cold, clammy hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing hold of mine with a grip like iron. I screamed, trying to pull away, but the hand's strength was overwhelming. It began to pull me into the mirror, into the swirling depths of the vortex. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Jenna's voice, muffled and panicked, calling my name from somewhere far away. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on cold, damp ground. The air was thick with an oppressive darkness, and the only sound was the distant, echoing drip of water. I pushed myself up, my body trembling, and tried to make sense of my surroundings. This was not my bathroom. It wasn't anywhere I recognized. The space around me was vast and cavernous, with walls that seemed to shift and shimmer like liquid shadows. A faint, eerie glow emanated from the ground, casting long, twisting shadows that played tricks on my mind. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself for warmth and comfort. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the cavern. There was no answer, only the sound of my own breathing and the distant drip, drip, drip of water. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I was utterly alone in this strange, nightmarish place. As I wandered through the darkness, I saw glimpses of movement in the shadows. Shapes flitted just out of sight, whispering unintelligible words that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't tell if they were real or just figments of my imagination, but either way, they made my skin crawl. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the darkness ahead of me. It was a woman, tall and thin, with long, tangled hair and eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her lips were twisted into a sinister smile. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The woman tilted her head, studying me with those eerie, glowing eyes. "I am Lilith," she said, her voice a soft, haunting whisper. "And you, Anna, have crossed into my realm." "Your realm?" I echoed, confusion and fear warring within me. "Where am I? How did I get here?" "You are in the mirror realm," Lilith replied, her smile widening. "A place between worlds, where reflections come to life and shadows hold secrets. You were brought here by the vortex, just as many others have been before you." I took a step back, my mind racing. "I don't belong here. I need to get back. Please, help me." Lilith's smile faded, and she looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. "Escape is not easy, Anna. The vortex holds you fast, and the shadows do not let go of their prey so easily. But there may be a way. Follow me." With that, she turned and began to walk deeper into the darkness. I hesitated for a moment, but the thought of staying alone in this terrifying place was even worse than following a strange, ghostly woman. I hurried after her, my footsteps echoing softly on the damp ground. As we walked, Lilith told me more about the mirror realm. It was a place where the barriers between reality and imagination blurred, where fears and desires took on physical forms. The vortex was a portal, drawing people in from the real world and trapping them here. Some had been here for centuries, lost in the shadows, their minds twisted by the darkness. We finally reached a large, ornate door set into the cavern wall. It was covered in strange, intricate symbols that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of their own. "This door leads to the heart of the mirror realm," Lilith said, her voice low and serious. "If you can face the shadows within, you might find a way back to your world. But be warned, the path is perilous, and the shadows will test you in ways you cannot imagine." I nodded, my heart pounding. I had no choice. I had to find a way back, no matter the cost. I reached out, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. The door creaked open, revealing a long, narrow hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity. Shadows danced on the walls, shifting and twisting as if they were alive. Lilith stepped back, her glowing eyes fixed on me. "Remember, Anna," she said, her voice a haunting whisper, "the shadows will test you. Only by facing them can you hope to return." With a final nod, I stepped through the doorway. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. I felt an icy chill run down my spine as the shadows closed in around me, whispering secrets and fears in a language I couldn't understand. I took a deep breath and started walking. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As I moved forward, I could feel the shadows pressing in on me, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to keep going. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light up ahead. I quickened my pace, desperate for any sign of hope. The light grew brighter, and I found myself standing in a small, circular room. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on the pedestal sat an ornate, ancient-looking mirror. As I approached the mirror, I could see my reflection staring back at me. But something was wrong. My reflection's eyes were wide with fear, and its mouth moved silently, as if trying to warn me of something. I reached out to touch the mirror, and the surface rippled like water. "Anna," a voice whispered from behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The shadows had grown thicker, their whispers more urgent. "Anna, don't trust the mirror." I turned back to the mirror, my heart racing. My reflection was still there, but now it seemed to be struggling against the glass, as if trying to break free. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. The reflection's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a sudden surge of fear. "Help me," it mouthed silently. "Please, help me." I didn't know what to do. The shadows were closing in, their whispers filling my mind with doubt and confusion. But something inside me told me I had to trust my reflection. I reached out again, this time pressing my palm firmly against the glass. The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, and I was thrown backward. When I looked up, the room had changed. The shadows were gone, replaced by a blinding light. In the center of the room stood a figure, tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed like embers. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The figure stepped forward, its gaze piercing through me. "I am the Keeper of the Shadows," it said, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "You have broken the first seal, but there are many more to face. Each will test you in ways you cannot imagine." I struggled to my feet, my mind reeling. "I just want to go home," I said, my voice cracking with desperation. The Keeper's eyes softened slightly. "To return to your world, you must pass all the tests and face the final shadow. Only then will the vortex release its hold on you." With those words, the light began to fade, and the shadows crept back in. The Keeper vanished, leaving me alone once more. But now, I had a glimmer of hope. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and steeled myself for the trials ahead. The blinding light faded completely, plunging me back into the oppressive darkness. My eyes strained to adjust, and I took a hesitant step forward. The cold, damp ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie rhythm, as if the very earth was alive. The Keeper's words echoed in my mind. Each test would push me to my limits. As I continued down the narrow hallway, a soft, almost soothing glow began to emanate from ahead. I followed the light, my heart pounding, until I reached another doorway. The door was marked with strange, glowing runes that seemed to shift and change before my eyes. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped through. I found myself in a dimly lit room filled with tall, twisted trees whose branches reached out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. In the center of the room stood a tall, imposing figure cloaked in shadows. Its eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, fixed on me as I entered. "Welcome, Anna," the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the trees. "I am the guardian of the first test. To proceed, you must confront your deepest fear." My heart raced as the guardian's words sank in. My deepest fear? How could I face something so abstract, so personal? I took a tentative step forward, and the shadows around the guardian seemed to ripple and twist, forming a dark, swirling vortex. "Step into the vortex," the guardian commanded. "Only by confronting your fear can you hope to pass this test." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and forced myself to move closer. The vortex seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, and as I reached out to touch it, I felt a chill run down my spine. I hesitated, fear gripping me, but I knew I had no choice. I had to face whatever awaited me within. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the vortex. The world around me dissolved into darkness, and I felt myself falling, spinning, lost in a void of shadows. When I finally stopped, I found myself standing in a familiar place, my childhood home. The house was exactly as I remembered it, but something was off. The air was thick with tension, and every corner seemed to hide a lurking presence. I walked through the halls, my footsteps echoing softly, until I reached my old bedroom. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. Sitting on the bed was a figure I knew all too well, my younger self. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear, clutching a worn teddy bear to her chest. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Memories of my childhood flooded back, memories I had tried so hard to bury. The fear and loneliness, the nights spent crying myself to sleep. I had run away from it all, tried to forget, but now it was staring me in the face. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice choked with emotion. I didn't know how to help you. I was scared too. My younger self's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. You abandoned me. You left me to face the darkness alone. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt beside her, taking her small, trembling hand in mine. I'm here now, I whispered. I won't leave you again. We'll face the darkness together. As I spoke those words, the room began to shift and change. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a soft, warm light. My younger self smiled, and the shadows that had haunted us both began to fade. The vortex reappeared, but this time it was different. It glowed with a soft, welcoming light. You have passed the first test, the Guardian's voice echoed through the room. Remember this strength, Anna. You will need it for the trials ahead. With a final, reassuring glance at my younger self, I stepped back into the vortex, ready to face whatever awaited me next. Emerging from the vortex, I found myself in a labyrinth of mirrors, each reflecting twisted, distorted images of myself. The mirrors stretched infinitely in all directions, creating a dizzying maze of reflections. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the faint sound of my footsteps echoing off the glass surfaces. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings, but every direction looked the same. Anna, a voice called, soft and distant, yet unmistakable. It was my mother's voice. Anna, where are you? My heart ached at the sound. My mother had died when I was young, leaving me with only fragmented memories of her. I followed the voice, my eyes scanning the mirrors for any sign of her. The reflections seemed to shift and change as I moved, creating a disorienting, nightmarish landscape. As I turned a corner, I saw her. My mother stood in the center of a clearing, her image reflected in countless mirrors. She looked exactly as I remembered her, with her warm smile and kind eyes. Mom? I called out, my voice trembling. Anna, you must find me, she said, her voice echoing through the labyrinth. Only then can you move forward. I reached out to touch her reflection, but my hand passed through the glass. Frustrated, I began to navigate the maze, trying to reach her. The mirrors seemed to close in around me, warping and distorting my path. I stumbled, my mind reeling from the shifting reflections. As I continued, the reflections began to change. They no longer showed just my mother, they depicted scenes from my past, moments I had tried to forget. I saw myself as a child, crying alone in my room after my mother's death. I saw my teenage self, angry and rebellious, pushing everyone away. Each reflection was a painful reminder of the struggles I had faced, the loneliness and fear that had shaped me. Anna, don't give up, my mother's voice urged. You're stronger than you think. I pressed on, determined to find her. The maze seemed to stretch on forever, but I refused to be defeated. I confronted each painful memory, letting the emotions wash over me without turning away. The mirrors reflected not just my pain, but also my resilience, my determination to keep going despite everything. Finally, I reached the center of the maze. My mother stood there, waiting for me. She smiled, her eyes filled with pride. You did it, Anna, she said, her voice filled with warmth. You faced your past and found your strength. Tears filled my eyes as I stepped forward, reaching out to touch her hand. This time, it didn't pass through the glass. I felt her warmth, her reassurance. I miss you, Mom, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. I'm always with you, Anna, she replied, her image beginning to fade. Remember that. No matter what, you are never alone. As her reflection disappeared, the mirrors around me began to shatter, the glass falling away to reveal a new path. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The next test awaited me, but I knew I could face it. The path led me to another door, marked with the same glowing runes as before. I pushed it open, ready for whatever lay beyond. The room I entered was dark and silent, but I could feel the presence of something powerful, something ancient. You have passed the second test, the Keeper's voice echoed around me. But the journey is far from over. Each step brings you closer to the final shadow. "Prepare yourself, Anna, for the true test is yet to come." With those words, the darkness around me began to shift and change, forming a new landscape. I steeled myself, ready to face whatever awaited me next. The keeper's warnings echoed in my mind, but I felt a newfound strength within me. I was ready to face the shadows and find my way home. The darkness lifted, revealing a desolate, eerie village shrouded in mist. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The buildings were old and decrepit, their windows dark and empty. It felt as if time had forgotten this place, leaving it frozen in a perpetual state of decay. A sense of unease settled over me as I stepped forward, the ground crunching beneath my feet. "Anna," the keeper's voice resonated in the stillness, "this is the village of the lost. Here, you will face the third test. Find the light that guides you, and the path will be revealed." I glanced around, searching for any sign of life, but the village seemed abandoned. Shadows flitted in the corners of my vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The silence was oppressive, pressing in on me from all sides. I took a deep breath and started down the main street, my eyes scanning the buildings for any hint of the light I needed to find. As I walked, I felt eyes on me, watching from the shadows. The sensation was unnerving, making my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, desperate to find the light and escape this haunting place. The mist thickened, obscuring my vision, and I stumbled over the uneven ground. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty streets. There was no answer, just the hollow silence. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I was not alone. Shadows moved closer, their forms indistinct and menacing. I turned a corner and found myself in front of an old church. Its steeple loomed overhead, casting a long shadow across the ground. The doors were ajar, and a faint, flickering light spilled out from within. Hope surged within me as I approached, pushing the heavy doors open and stepping inside. The interior of the church was dark and cold, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. Candles flickered on the altar, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I reached the altar, I saw a figure kneeling before it, their head bowed in prayer. "Hello?" I called out softly. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. "Excuse me, are you?" The figure turned, and I gasped. It was a young girl, no older than 10, with pale skin and hollow eyes. She stared at me with a haunting intensity, her expression blank. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice echoing eerily in the empty church. "I'm looking for the light," I said, my voice trembling. "Can you help me?" The girl shook her head, her eyes never leaving mine. "The light is hidden. Only the brave can find it. You must face the darkness within yourself to see it." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I looked around the church, trying to find any clue, any sign of the light. The shadows seemed to grow darker, closing in around me. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, focusing on the fear and doubt that gnawed at my soul. I remembered the pain of my past, the loneliness and grief that had shaped me. I let those emotions wash over me, embracing them instead of running away. As I did, a warm, comforting light began to glow within me, pushing back the darkness. I opened my eyes, and the church was transformed. The shadows had receded, and the light within me illuminated the space. The girl smiled, her hollow eyes now filled with warmth. "You found it," she said softly. "The light was within you all along." The church doors swung open, revealing a new path bathed in light. I stepped forward, the girl's smile fading as the darkness returned. "Remember, Anna," she called after me, "the light will guide you, but the shadows will always follow." I nodded, a sense of determination filling me. I walked through the doors and into the light, ready for the next test. The keeper's voice echoed in my mind, a reminder of the challenges that still lay ahead. But I felt stronger now, more certain of my path. The light from the church led me into a dense, silent forest. The trees were tall and ancient, their branches entwined like skeletal fingers reaching towards the sky. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and earth, and the only sound was the soft crunch of leaves beneath my feet. As I ventured deeper into the forest, a sense of unease settled over me, the shadows between the trees seeming to pulse with hidden life. "You are nearing the heart of the Mirror Realm," the Keeper's voice echoed in my mind. "Here, the past and present converge. To pass the fourth test, you must confront the echoes of your past." I walked cautiously, my eyes scanning the forest for any sign of danger. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the shadows. I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me, memories flickering at the edge of my consciousness. I had faced my fears and my childhood pain, but now I had to confront something deeper, something I had tried to forget. As I continued, the forest began to change. The trees became gnarled and twisted, their branches forming grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for me. The air grew colder, and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring my path. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. Through the fog, I saw a figure standing among the trees. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face I knew all too well. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The figure turned, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my father, looking just as he had before he died. "Anna," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "Why did you leave us?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I stepped closer. "Dad, I didn't leave. You were gone. I didn't know what to do." His expression softened, but the pain in his eyes remained. "We needed you, Anna. Your mother and I, we were always there for you. Why did you run away?" The guilt and grief I had buried for so long surged to the surface. "I was scared," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I couldn't handle losing you. It felt like my whole world was falling apart." He reached out, his hand passing through the fog to rest on my shoulder. "You can't keep running from the past, Anna. You have to face it. Only then can you move forward." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I miss you so much." He smiled, a bittersweet expression. "I know, sweetheart. But you have to let go. It's the only way you'll find peace." The fog around us began to lift, and the forest transformed. The twisted trees straightened, their branches no longer menacing. The air grew warmer, and the path ahead became clear. My father's image began to fade, but his words stayed with me. "Goodbye, Anna," he said softly. "Remember, we're always with you." I watched as his figure dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone once more. The forest was peaceful now, the shadows receding as I continued forward. I felt a sense of closure, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I had faced the pain of my past, and though it still hurt, I knew I could move on. The path led me to a clearing where a small, clear pool of water lay. I knelt beside it, gazing into its depths. My reflection stared back at me, but this time, it looked different. Stronger. More determined. I had come so far, and though the journey was far from over, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. As I stood, the Keeper's voice echoed once more. "You have passed the fourth test, Anna. The final trials await. Each step brings you closer to the heart of the Mirror Realm. Be strong, and remember the light within you." With renewed resolve, I continued down the path, ready to face the final challenges. The forest around me seemed to whisper encouragement, the shadows no longer frightening but familiar. I had faced my past and found strength in my memories. Now, I had to use that strength to find my way home. The path through the forest led me to a vast, open field under a dark, starless sky. The air was still, and the ground beneath my feet was cold and hard. In the distance, I saw a towering figure standing alone, its silhouette stark against the horizon. As I approached, I felt a sense of foreboding, knowing this was the next challenge I had to face. The figure turned to face me, revealing itself to be a tall, armored knight. Its armor was dark and weathered, and its eyes glowed with an intense, fiery light. In its hand, it held a massive sword that seemed to hum with a strange energy. "I am the guardian of truth," the knight said, its voice echoing with a deep, resonant power. To pass this test, you must face the truth within yourself. Only then can you move forward. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. What truth? I asked, my voice trembling. What do I need to face? The night raised its sword, pointing it at me. The truth you hide from the world. The truth you hide from yourself. Step forward and confront it, or be forever lost in the shadows. With those words, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and a dark, swirling vortex appeared at my feet. I felt a cold wind whip around me, pulling at my clothes and hair. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped into the vortex. I found myself standing in a dark, featureless void. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, images began to flicker around me, scenes from my life playing out in rapid succession. Moments of pain, fear, and regret flashed before my eyes, each one more intense than the last. I saw myself pushing away friends and family, isolating myself in my grief. I saw the moments of weakness and doubt that I had tried to bury, the times I had failed and given up. Each image was a painful reminder of the truths I had been running from. As the images faded, a figure stepped forward from the darkness. It was me, but not the me I knew. This version of myself was cold and distant, with eyes that burned with anger and resentment. You can't hide from me, she said, her voice filled with bitterness. I am the truth you refuse to face. I took a step back, fear gripping my heart. I'm not like you, I said, my voice shaking. I've changed. I've faced my fears and my past. The figure laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think that's enough? You think you can just walk away from your mistakes, your failures? You're weak, Anna. You've always been weak. The words cut deep, but I forced myself to stand tall. I know I've made mistakes, I said, my voice growing steadier. I know I've been weak. But I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to face the truth. The figure's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer. Then prove it, she said, her voice a low growl. Face me. Face the truth, and see if you're strong enough to overcome it. I took a deep breath and nodded. I will, I said, determination filling me. I'll face you, and I'll prove that I'm stronger than you think. The figure lunged at me, and I braced myself for the impact. But instead of striking me, she vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. The void around me began to dissolve, and I found myself back in the field, the night standing before me. You have faced the truth within yourself, the guardian of truth said, lowering its sword. You have proven your strength. The final test awaits. As the night stepped aside, a new path opened up before me, leading to a towering castle shrouded in mist. I felt a mixture of fear and determination as I stepped forward, knowing that the final test would be the hardest yet. The castle loomed closer, its dark spires reaching towards the sky. I could feel the weight of the shadows pressing in on me, but I knew I had to keep going. The light within me flickered, but it was still there, guiding me forward. With each step, I felt the final challenge drawing nearer. I knew that whatever awaited me in the castle would push me to my limits, but I was ready. I had faced my past, my fears, and the truth within myself. Now, I had to face the heart of the mirror realm and find my way home. The towering castle loomed ahead, its dark spires vanishing into the misty sky. Each step I took felt heavier, the weight of the shadows pressing down on me. The light within me flickered like a fragile flame, but it was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. As I approached the massive iron gates, they creaked open, revealing a grand, empty hall shrouded in darkness. Stepping inside, I was struck by the eerie silence that filled the space. The hall was vast, with high ceilings and walls lined with ancient, cracked mirrors. Their surfaces reflected distorted images of myself, twisted and grotesque. In the center of the hall stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with an intense, malevolent light. Welcome, Anna, the figure intoned, its voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the hall. I am the master of shadows, the heart of the mirror realm. You have come far, but your journey ends here. I took a deep breath, summoning all my courage. I've faced my fears, my past, and the truth within myself, I said, my voice steady. I won't be trapped here. I will find my way home. The Master of Shadows laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. You think you can escape? It sneered. The Mirror Realm holds those who enter it. You cannot leave unless you defeat me. With those words, the hall began to change. The mirrors cracked and shattered, their pieces floating in the air and forming a swirling vortex around us. The shadows grew thicker, coalescing into dark, writhing forms that encircled me. I felt a chill run down my spine as the Master of Shadows stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. Face me, Anna, it challenged. Show me the strength you claim to possess. I closed my eyes, feeling the light within me. It was weak, flickering, but it was still there. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes, meeting the Master of Shadows' gaze. I will, I said, determination filling my voice. I'll prove that I'm stronger than you think. With a roar, the Master of Shadows lunged at me, its form shifting and twisting. I braced myself, raising my hands to defend against the onslaught. As the shadows closed in, I felt the light within me surge, pushing back against the darkness. I focused on the memories of my journey, the strength I had found in facing my fears and my past. The light grew brighter, illuminating the hall and driving the shadows back. The Master of Shadows recoiled, its form flickering and weakening. No, it hissed, its voice filled with rage. You cannot defeat me. But I could feel the power within me growing, the light pushing back the darkness. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on the Master of Shadows. I can, I said, my voice unwavering. I will. With a final, desperate scream, the Master of Shadows lunged at me. I raised my hands, channeling all the light within me. The two forces collided, and the hall was filled with a blinding, brilliant light. The shadows screamed and writhed, but they could not withstand the power of the light. When the light finally faded, I found myself standing alone in the hall. The mirrors were shattered, the shadows gone. The Master of Shadows was nowhere to be seen. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace and clarity. I had done it. I had faced the heart of the Mirror Realm and emerged victorious. A doorway appeared at the far end of the hall, glowing with a soft, welcoming light. I walked towards it, my steps light and confident. As I crossed the threshold, I felt a sense of release, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The light enveloped me, and I felt myself being pulled back, away from the Mirror Realm. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back in my bathroom, standing before the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, whole and unbroken. The vortex was gone, replaced by the familiar, comforting image of myself. I took a deep breath, relief flooding through me. Anna? Jenna's voice called from the other side of the door. Are you okay in there? I smiled, feeling a newfound strength and confidence. Yeah, I'm okay, I replied, my voice steady. I'm more than okay. As I stepped out of the bathroom, I knew that I had changed. The journey through the Mirror Realm had tested me in ways I could never have imagined, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that I had the strength within me to overcome them. The vortex in the mirror was gone, but the lessons I had learned remained. I had faced my fears, my past, and the truth within myself. And in doing so, I had found the light that would guide me through the darkest of times. The end. Subscribe for more. Thank you.